Hiya, welcome back to Bible Break. We're in Genesis 13, short chapter, so we're going to read it all. And reading from my NIV as usual. The subheading here for me is Abram and Lot separate. So here we go. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev. Last time we left them, they were being chased out of Egypt by Pharaoh, remember? With his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving around with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. So that's not a bad problem. And quarrelling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot, that is. And the Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time, so it's not as if the land had been uninhabited. So we're verse 8 now. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarrelling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, which they'd left, towards Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. So where he ends up in this chapter, an altar to the Lord goes up. And in the first part of the chapter, we see them leaving Egypt, not to go wandering around, but to go straight back to the land that God had shown them, back to Canaan, the promised land. And for Abram, first port of call, back to the altar which he had previously built there, where we are told that he called on the name of the Lord once again. And I think that stood him in good stead, very good stead, for that which was to come. Because in what is to come now, directly, we see how Abram has really grown in his relationship with God, and how his faith manifests itself in his dealings with his nephew. His nephew, who he treats as a grown man now, because that's who he is, and he's done quite well for himself, as it were. More correctly, God has blessed him, as he has blessed Abraham. So, as I think I mentioned when we were doing the reading, they've got this rather good problem now, in that God has prospered both of them, Abraham and Lot, his nephew, so greatly that they are falling over each other. It's not a bad problem to have, is it? That they didn't just survive in Egypt, but they've come back rich, prosperous, with great goods, and now there isn't enough room for them in the land. Not only for them, but I just repeat there that we were told as well that the land that they were occupying now wasn't initially uninhabited. There were already these Canaanites and Perizzites in the land. These were the original people of the land, you could say, for our purposes. But there we are. There's not enough room, and something has to be done about it. The herdsmen are quarreling and arguing with each other, and things are going a bit downhill. Now, as I say, it's just here that we see how Abram's character and his faith, his relationship with God, to sum it all up, manifests itself. And it manifests itself in the magnanimity, the generosity of spirit which Abram shows towards his nephew. Because first of all, a solution has to be found. Abram realizes that to avoid any grey areas, as it were, or anything any more problematic in the future, it would be better if a clean break was made. But he wants a clean break which nonetheless maintains the bond and the unity which exists between them as a family. Quite naturally, as it should be, but also in case of necessity. And as we will see in due course, in fact, we won't have long to wait, there is going to be a real case of necessity. And it won't concern Abram himself, it will concern his nephew. Anyway, we'll come to that. In the meantime, we're focusing on Abram and his magnanimity. Because he doesn't say to Lot, oh, let's sit down and study this in detail so that we can both sort of, fairly, divide the spoils, as it were, and, so that none of us loses out or misses out. That's not the spirit in which he approaches this at all. On the contrary, he says to Lot, you choose. I'm going to let you choose. You decide which direction you want to go, and I'll go the other direction, so that there's no falling out between us, because we can't have that. And this puts him at a disadvantage, because from our reading, it's quite clear. Lot only has to turn his eyes in one direction, and then he follows the evidence of his eyes. Well, it's quite obvious where it's all at. The plain of the Jordan. That's the fertile area. That's obviously the area where it's going to be easier to prosper and continue to prosper. So he doesn't give it a second thought. He doesn't think about how his uncle Abram might be disadvantaged by this. He just says to Abram, in effect, I suppose, well, thank you very much. And he heads for the plain of the Jordan. Now, this doesn't leave Abram destitute, but it does leave him in a less advantageous situation than that of his nephew. But as I was saying, this is the whole point, that Abram has learned that he doesn't have to insist, that he doesn't have to put his own foot down, that he doesn't have to maneuver or manipulate to get his way. he has learned that the main thing is that he puts his faith and his confidence in God, the God he called upon as soon as he got back from Egypt. Now, before I go any further, there's one thing I should mention, because it is mentioned in our reading, which is that what Lot didn't know, and I don't think that this was, I don't think that this was a fast one in any way, shape, or form that Abram had pulled on him. I don't think Abram knew anything about it. But what Lot didn't know, as it turns out, is that even though the plain of the Jordan looked fantastic, there were cities in the plain, which is because that was where other people had naturally settled, where there was great wickedness and there was great evil that was being committed, and which was offending God, because they were sinning, and that is what sin is. First and foremost, it is offense against God. So Lot's choice turned out to be a bit of a mixed blessing, because whilst on the face of it, everything looked fine and dandy down there, there were hidden dangers and hidden problems. I'm not making any particular moral judgment, but that is what Lot got. What a lot he got. That is what he got by following the evidence of his eyes. Abram, on the other hand, let Lot do that. He did not follow the evidence of his eyes. His offer to Lot was based upon his faith in God, and so even though he was in he wasn't destitute, obviously, but even though he was left in a less advantageous situation, shall we say, than Lot, as a result of granting him what appeared to be the better part, he wasn't in reality in a worse situation, because he stayed squarely in the land of Canaan itself, the land of promise, and God confirmed his promise to Abram to give him this land as far as his eyes could see and survey. Not only that, but he renewed the promise to multiply him and his family so that they would become a great people and eventually a great nation. And through him, all the families of the earth will eventually be blessed. Important to note, I think, again, at the present time, that this is what God considers and what God grants as a mark of his blessing, that he multiplies his people. It was the original creation ordinance to Adam and Eve: go forth and multiply. And where God is blessing and who God blesses, he doesn't cut them down to size or cut their size. He multiplies his people. So there we are. We leave it at that. Lot follows the evidence of his own eyes. It's not. It's quite natural, the choice and the decision that he makes. Abram, he grants him that because he's learning something different, which isn't to do with the evidence of his eyes, but to do with the evidence of what he doesn't see. But where it's at isn't what looks good, but where it's at is his faith in God and his confidence in God, that God will see him good, that God will see him right, that whatever he seeds and gives generously to others, well, God will make that up to him. That is not a problem. So really, we're seeing how Abram, in such a short space of time, it seems, has already advanced in his walk and in his relationship with God, and how his faith in God is growing as he goes along. Okay, we'll get back to him next time, and I'll see you next time.